It's great that you took your time to meet with us today, so thank you very much. Let's start by you can give a little bit of background about who you are and where you live. And
Well, Marjorie, I was
and your name?
born, my name is Ray Monte. It was changed. My mother was Basque, my father was Greek. The name was Mantafoulis. But when my grandfather arrived in Napa, he bought a cigar store from Nick Montebello. The sign painter came in and took everything off the name except Monte. This is back in 1900. So all the people in Yountville thought that the new owner of the cigar store and everything was Monte. So that's how we got the name. It stayed that way until it has been all the way through all the generations of my family. I was born in 1923 in a house on 911 Vallejo Street, and I liked where I was because I was a very hard birth. And in those days, everybody has a word, they called it cool, and they called it marvelous and love. In those days, it was 1923, streak-a-doo. It was a real saying, you know. But anyhow, I went to the schools in Napa and graduated from St. John's and went to the service. And then came back, and after high school in Napa, I went to the University of San Francisco. In the glory days, 1951, I graduated with all of the great athletes, and the Jesuits were very tough. We were assigned a chair. That was roll call. You got to know who sat in the chair because there was only 20 students in the class. So the father, one of them, was supposed to tell us this. He said that you veterans that are on the GI Bill, if that chair isn't filled, I'm going down to 1949 4th Street at the VA Center and tell them to take your GI benefits away. We never missed a class, and I was very lucky to be in there. They sat us alphabetical order. I was with Ollie Madsen, Burl Toller, George Moscone, Bob Sinclair, alphabetical order, and we became very close friends. And later on in life, it'll come up about how it helped me in my life.
Well, I just wanted to take some time to introduce myself. I was going to do that in the beginning. My name is Margie Moeller, and I've lived in Yountville since 1998, not nearly as long as you have. And I'm currently on the town council. We call it the town now.
Into the service, I volunteered into the old Army Air Corps, and I ended up on Saipan as a control tower operator, landing B-29s and B-17s, and then I moved to Guam to Harmon Field as a control tower operator. I was very lucky because I was an operator, a radio operator gunner, but because of my radio experience, they made a tower operator out of me. Then when I got back to school, I met Nancy. We were classmates in 1948, and we got married, and she was a Yountville girl. I was raised in Napa. I've been married 62 years. Sweet Nancy and I, we have 4 children. And the interesting part of our life is that when I was raised in Napa, we used to say, "Where are you from?" I'd say, "Napa." And they'd say, "Oh, the nut house, huh?" I'd say, "Yeah, you know." When Nancy would say she was born in Yountville, they'd say, "Oh, you're up there with those drunken veterans."
And what was her maiden name?
Her maiden name was Tyther. Her father was, they had the ranch right next to the veterans' home, and she was raised on the ranch there. She was very close with Myra Holdeman, and of course Myra Holdeman brought her over to the home for the movies, for the picnics, for the ball games. Oh, they were great days. And of course, she knew the home probably as good as I did. But anyhow, then We rented the house from SI Volts, and it didn't have any electricity in it. So we got the PG&E to come in by using all electrical equipment. So they brought wiring to the house. That was back in 1955,
And that was here in Yountville.
right there at the south of Yountville on that ranch. So then later on, a classmate of mine came over and he says, there's a ranch for sale on State Lane, and that was State Farm Lane, where the Veterans Home had 820 acres, where they raised the beef. They raised the beef for the Veterans Home and Imola. So this classmate of mine says, there's a ranch for sale over there on State Lane, why don't you buy it? So we did. We ended up buying the ranch because we had cattle. We had Hereford cattle. It was a country club. This was before the vineyards were in now. It's all bare land for pasture. Well, we had a swimming pool. We had a duck pond. We had pits for the honkers. We could take our saddle horses and go deer hunting up in Rector where the dam is, before the dam was in. And Mr. George Abatey, a classmate of mine, he was the assessor. And he says, Ray, you're going to be out of the cattle business. And we had leased a lot of land in the hills. We irrigate the cattle and then move them to the hills in the wintertime.
So what year did you buy that property?
1955. And I said to George Abatey, what are you talking about out of the cattle business? We got everything. We got the horses, the saddle horses for the kids. We got everything we'd ever want. We got a nice bunch of cows. We had 13 walnut trees on that ranch, and they paid the taxes. When I saw the walnut trees, I wasn't too happy because I knew I'd have to pick them. But anyhow, needless to say, I really loved the walnut trees because the price was up and it paid the taxes. So then what happened when George Abatey said to me, when 3 ranches sell around you're going to be out of the cattle business. Well, lo and behold, Pete Mundavy bought the ranch north of us. Christian Brothers bought the ranch west of us. Louis Martini bought the ranch east of us. We're out of the cattle business. So I figured, well, these vineyard yellows have moved me out of the cattle business. I'll come over here, and Mr. Garcia had this 22 acres, the old Grossinger winery, for sale. So I went to him, and he wanted $150,000 for it, and I said to him, well, there's not a real estater involved. Why don't you lower the price because of a commission? And he reached in the door and pulled out a contract for $30,000 and said, offer this, take this, Ray, because you can get $30,000 by tearing the buildings down. I went into shock. But on the tape,
What year was this? Do you
this was
recall?
1965, 66.
66.
And this gentleman, Don Moore, gave me a tape about Ella Gates. And in there, Ella Gates said that her husband, Mr. Garcia, went to Thurman Gates and said, what do you think, Thurman? Do you think I should tear the buildings down for $30,000? And Thurman Gates told him, no, keep the buildings. So I have to thank Thurman Gates and Ella for keeping the buildings.
So is the reason someone could make $30,000, was that for the bricks?
Just for the bricks and the timbers. Most of the timbers are 16 by 16 timbers to hold. See, they crushed the grapes on the top floor.
Right.
And then, so it was and the stable, had the stable back there. There was millions of bricks and timbers in that building, still there, thank God. But anyhow, when we got into that, I said to Mr. Garcia, well, will you lower the price? So he pulled out the contract and said, here's $30,000 if you tear the building down. Well, I wasn't interested, so we couldn't make a deal. Well, now we're selling a lot of blue sky in Yountville. Thurman Gates was cleaning up the south end of town, and we had better do something in the north end of town. So what we did, we started to put in shops. My wife went in with a piece of chalk and laid out so many square feet for a shop to come in. And lo and behold, she rented 18 shops. And we went along fine.
This was along Washington Street, north near Madison? or?
It's in the old winery building.
Oh, you're in the vintage 1870s.
We did that.
Okay, I
We
see.
named it in 1966.
So you consider that the north part of Yountville at that time?
Well, at that particular time it was, because the only thing north was Tenash's grocery store and John Lloyd's service station. There wasn't anything else. There was the old olive factory, which is south of the service station. And then there was the Flycatcher, which was a...
Let me guess. It sold alcohol.
No, they didn't sell alcohol. They couldn't sell alcohol from 1900, 65 years. What happened was the townspeople said to the Veterans Home Administrator, "You're selling a plug of tobacco for a nickel, and you're selling a shot of brandy for 25 cents. It's not fair to compete with us in downtown." So they put a buffer zone on the Veterans Home. No booze from the front gate a mile north and a mile south. 3-2 beer in town, that's all. Well, the town died. It had a slow death. So when we got the vintage property, we went ahead and had the cafe, which is the Pacific Blue. We had the vintage with the shops. We had the stable for the art gallery and the bingo. And
So who owned the property at that time?
we owned it. Yes.
Oh, so you did buy it?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. We bought the property, owned it then.
Okay.
There was a foundry in the stable making rims for automobiles, 24 hours a day. Can you imagine, in a foundry in downtown? When we bought the property and moved him off the property, Mrs. Beard called me up and says, "Thank you, Ray. It's the first night's sleep I've had in 6 years." So anyhow, he was gone. Then we got rid of the roofer. But anyhow, we had the shops. And when we put in the cafe, we bought a $1,200 espresso machine and took the coffee up to 20 cents a cup.
Wow, that's an expensive machine back then.
Yeah, and it's still in there probably. And the locals thought that was terrible. You got one from 10 cents to 20 cents. But I had a lot of friends, and I thought, well, if Thurman, Gates, and Eller are cleaning things up here, let's see if we can do the same. Well, I went to school with Jim Boitano at USF, and he ended up being the city attorney for the city of Napa. And Jim says to me, I would like to catch the bookie. And I said, well, that's your department, not mine. "No, Ray, I want to ask a favor of you." I says, "What is it, Jim?" I says, "I'd like to put an investigator on the second floor of the vintage because I'd like to catch the bookie." So he put an investigator on the second floor of the vintage. And when the bookie was burning the papers downstairs, before he got started, the investigator went down and he got all the papers because he had the bookie. He was betting on horses, and they were coming from Napa to gamble. They were coming from St. Helena to gamble. The veterans were gambling. So anyhow, he caught the bookie and said to the bookie, "You've got a choice. You can have San Quentin or Seattle." He says, "I'll take Seattle." So that was the bookie. Well, because of the buffer zone on the Veterans Home, you had to go to the Grapevine to get a bottle, or the Rock Villa, or go down to the Red Hen, the bottle.
And where was the rock?
Well, the freeway took the Rock Villa out. It was the famous old building owned by the people, Al Lacoste and Guillaume, the French people that had that property. Well, when the highway went in, it took the Rock Villa. Now, it was a beautiful, beautiful bar. I'll tell you how much business they had in the liquor business. I.W. Harper was 100 proof whiskey in pint bottles, or little half pints. Dave Cavanaugh was the distributor. John Grattoni was the salesman. They bought so much I.W. Harper between the Grapevine and the Rock Villa that they sent John Grattoni back to New York to go to a Yankees baseball game and see a fight with Rocky Marciano. So you know that's a lot of booze.
That's a lot of booze.
Well, what happened was, in the course of that, the sheriff was real interested in the bootlegging. Earl Randall was his name. So he says to me, "What do you think, Ray?" And I says, "Well, let's ride around town. I'll show you something." So we come by Jack Tarver's house, and Jack Tarver would take the shade in his living room, and he would pull the shade down, and on the bottom of it would be "Ice today." There wasn't any ice delivered in Yountville for years.
And where did he live? Do you recall?
He
what
lived on
street?
Yon Street, going just past the school. The house is still there. He was a wonderful guy. He was an amputee, World War I veteran. And Jack Tarver would pull that down because he wanted a bottle. So the cab driver would charge him $1.50 to go up to the Rock Villa
From the Veterans Home.
from downtown Yountville.
Just downtown.
Yeah, see, because there were a lot of taxis. We had all kinds of taxis to take these guys all over. I would say there's probably 8 or 10 taxi cabs in town. So what they would do, they would charge Jack Tarver $1.50 to go up and get a bottle. Then they'd charge him $1.50 back, but they wouldn't even leave town. They'd reach under the seat of the cab because they had the booze. So Earl watched them to see what they did. He said, "It's time to change this, Ray." I said, "Okay, what do you want to do?" He said, "Let's go through the garbage cans and find out what's going on with these bottles." Well, I.W. Harper Red is 86 proof. I.W. Harper Green is 100 proof. But on there it tells you the number, and that tells you where it's coming from. Most of the booze is coming from Nevada. There wasn't even sales in this preventable here. Well, the councilman, John Lloyd, Thurman Gates, Ben Farrell sat on the council. Capito was a member of the counter
Right.
here home, and Dr. Johnson was on the staff there. So the three of them wanted to change the liquor law so we didn't care about the hard liquor. We wanted to have wine in a bona fide eating place.
You wanted that for the people in Yountville.
Yes, we wanted, and the councilman wanted it, and the sheriff wanted to get rid of the bootleggers, big time. So what Earl did, we went to Sacramento to several meetings with these people in Sacramento. The director of Veterans Affairs, Joe Farber, was very close with Carboni up at Grapevine, and he didn't want to see the liquor. He didn't want Lee and Florence Carboni to lose the business. But unbeknown to him, Lee and Florence Carboni was holding a license in the event that the law changed. Well, anyhow, I went over to Sacramento, and I went into the restroom, and the director of Veterans Affairs followed me in. This is my boss, because I was a Veteran Service Officer for Napa County. I had an office here, I had one in Napa, one in St. Helena, one in Calistoga. So when I went in the bathroom, the director of Veterans Affairs followed me in, and he got under my pretty tough. He says, "You want to see the liquor law change for benefits?" And I says, "You're absolutely right." About that time, George Moscone walked in, and he could see things weren't going too good. He was the mayor of San Francisco at that
Right.
time. And he was over in Sacramento, head of the Senate. So we had a nice visit together and so forth and so on. He says, "What's the trouble, Ray?" I says, "Well, Joe, I want to see the liquor law change. And Joe doesn't want to see it changed. He wants to keep the buffer zone." Well, anyhow, George Moscone says to me, "You know, Ray," he says, "there's 22 Democrats and there's 22 Republicans, and I break the tie." Well, Joe didn't know what to say. So that ended the conversation. So lo and behold, several times we went to Sacramento with the councilman, with the sheriff, and so forth and so on. And then I had a friend, John Minnie, that was very close to Ed Meese. Ed Meese was under Reagan. Ed Meese was his hatchet man. So when Ed Meese and John Minnie met together, and we knew John. I knew John real well. He ended up being partners in the village. So we're sitting in the director's office over there, and this director gets a phone call from the governor's office. And he asked if John Minnie is there, and they talked and so forth and so on. Well, anyhow, they changed the law. So now we can have, like, Lee Carboni moved his license down and opened up the Whistle Stop, which was the nicest bar you could ever want to go into. That brought in liquor, that brought in the chefs, that brought in the restaurants, that brought in all Domaine Chandon, because they have wine tasting in the area, they could have everything you got. But I have to go back and tell you about the first city attorney that incorporated the city. Charlie Williams is his name. He wrote the statutes for the state of Alaska. We became very good friends because after the meeting, we'd go to the Grapevine for a nightcap. So Charlie Williams decided to incorporate the city between census, which meant that you could have 3 times the registered voters. So he took in the Veterans Home. There was 400 and some people in Yountville, the voters. There was probably 2,200 members at the home, 15 to 20, a lot of members. So he took the registered voters, 3 times the registered voters, presented the incorporation to the state. The state based that on how much money they would kick in for the city to start. And they put a sign out there, 5,500 people, population. But it was based, and that's how the city got all the money. And Charlie Williams ended up with Tinashe, Jack Forster, can't think of the other man's name, 3 of them. Probably was Thurman. But anyhow, they negotiated for the water from Rector. He got the Veterans Home to okay the water for the city of Yountville.
Because before the water was just dedicated for the veterans' homes, is that correct?
That's right, yeah. And that's the only ones who were supposed to get it.
So this happened shortly after Yountville was incorporated in the mid-60s?
Yes.
Okay.
So we was involved. I was at every council meeting I go to in the 60s, you know. But anyhow, that Charlie Williams is one of the finest. He was a municipal type attorney. He represented 6 cities. That's how his staff was. He was a big time. He wrote the statutes for the state of Alaska, but he really knew how to get the money for the city when they wanted to incorporate. And they did. They got a lot of money, and we were very happy about the incorporation.
Good.
We've got a city, the chef from when they started there, Domaine Chandon, they stayed at our hotel. We had a bed and breakfast, the old Magnolia. They came there and stayed with us, the people from France, and we got to know the chef Bernard Lafon. So they were real happy to have in the area they could have wine tasting. Mm-hmm. And all of these top chefs, the top chef from Silverado coming, he's still cooking in Yountville now. And I can name all of them. Keller, you know. We're famous. And it just tickles me to death to see it happen.
Great.
Really, makes me nice. So then while we got the liquor change, which was a very important issue, we turned around and we decided, hey, what we better do is get rid of the pimp. Excuse me. But he was only here 10 days a week because they ran out of money. It was on wheels. So the sheriff got rid of him. So I said to Orlando, I says, if there's a drug pusher in this town, don't you bust them here. We've got enough stuff going on that doesn't look good. Bust him in St. Lena or Calistoga if he's up there, not Yountville. So he did. But anyhow, we cleaned up just as much as Thurman Gates and Ella did down there. And just wonderful to see. And I could probably tell you stories of how my wife and I was just so happy to see such a successful town, to see 90 people waiting out there to get into that pastry shop.
It's pretty impressive, isn't it?
Yeah, and you better get a reservation to Bouchon's, or no, the maitre d', you can't get in. You can't even get into Tanash's old store, no reservations. And when we had the Magnolia Hotel, we had a restaurant and an excellent chef. Nancy went to school with him. Pancho Conrad Caceres. He spoke. He went as a chef for the interpreters at Stanford. And he cooked for the interpreters to speak German and Italian and all those, and Japanese and all that stuff. So after he got out of the service in 23 years, my wife asked him if he'd like to open a restaurant in the Magnolia Hotel. So he said yes. I'll only cook 48 dinners, 1 entree a night, and a veggie dish. So he spoke. He was 7 years in Italy, and he was 5 years in Germany, and 3 years in Okinawa. So he spoke German, Italian, Spanish, and Japanese on the food line. The air pilots from the Air Force, from the Japanese airlines, would come every Friday night to eat his fish. We never turned the tables. You got there at 5 o'clock, the table was yours.
Wow.
Now they would drink a lot of wine because the course of the evening was there. He fixed every dish that they never served in Napa Valley. Beef rouladen, beef Wellington, beef rouladen, Wiener Schnitzel.
Making me hungry.
Never was done in Napa Valley. And what we had a pastry shop. So when we didn't have a wine list, we had
So you had a pastry shop in the Magnolia Hotel?
in the back.
In the back?
The Court of the Two Sisters was there. So what happened when Pontius says, we don't need a wine list. I says, okay, what do you want to do? He says, well, I'm going to put a bottle up on the wine on the mantle and spotlight it. We had a house wine, a red and a white house wine. But he said, when I fix a German dish, when I fix beef rouladen, I'll use Charles Krug wine. And you can say the chef recommends Charles Krug with that. So when we had the wine from the German winery, we had the German dish, we went to the pastry shop and got Black Forest cherry torte cake to go with it. So then when we had an Italian dish, we got Louis Martini's wine, and we had veal scallopini, Italian dish. And we got Sicilian pound cake. Then when we had a French dish, we turned around and got De La Tour's wine up there and spotlighted it. And then we had Napoleon's for desserts. So it was a complete French dish. And what I would do, we had a cellar dining room for 22 and an upstairs dining room for 26. I would go upstairs and I would say, those folks down in the cellar believe that you guys up here can't name the 7 dwarfs. Well, then I'd go down in the cellar and I'd say, those guys upstairs are betting that you guys can't name the 7 dwarfs. Well, I had to have a list for my daughter who they were, because I didn't even know who they were myself. But anyhow, what they would do, they would work at it and work at it and work at it, and the ones that come up with 7 of them got a free drink. And we had more fun in the hotel. And then it was just absolutely wonderful to see all of these things happen. And our clientele in the Magnolia Hotel, we had Justice O. Douglas from the Supreme Court, Frank Morgan, Kate Jackson, Eddie Arnold, and, the guy from Cabaret, can't think of his name. Breakfast at the table in the morning, bed and breakfast, 6 rooms. That's all.
So when you purchased the hotel, what did you pay for that?
We paid $50,000 for the hotel, vacant, gutted, completely gutted. But when we got married, Nancy and I back in 1946, 7, we bought used furniture, which ended up being antiques. So when we bought the hotel, Paul Casera came up. He was an architect and engineer. So he said, I'm going to put in 6 rooms. And Ray, if it doesn't work, you have 6 in the family. Each one of you now can have your own bedroom and your own private bath.
Always good to have Plan B.
So then he said, but if you rent this hotel 10 nights a month, you're going to make it. Because we were paying more than Silverado and more than they paid in Santa Barbara. Well, Nancy went to the motel in St. Helena, went to the motel in Calistoga, because people were coming in, and when they were filled, they had to go to Vallejo to stay. So we decided, hey.
There was no hotels in Napa at that time.
Well, they were, but they were, they were booked a lot of times. And
I see.
so anyhow, what happened was that we went to Bonita Hotel and said, when you're full, send us your overflow. And we went to St. Calistoga to Doc Wilkinson. When you're full, we'll do the same thing. When we're full, we'll send them to you guys. So anyhow, he ended up with 100% occupancy because it was only 6 rooms.
Right.
And it was a wonderful experience and a wonderful time. We had a lot of fun. One time this gentleman came in and he walked into the hotel and he saw the old Victrola there. And on the Victrola we had Kay Kaiser's record, There's a Small Hotel. So this gentleman come over and he says to me, we're nice, with about 2 or 3 other ladies, 2 couple. He says, do you mind if I go over there and take a look at that phonograph? And I said, no, go ahead. He says, do you mind if I play it? I'd like to hear myself sing. It was Harry Babbitt.
Wow.
With Hank Kaiser.
Wow.
So those are the kind of things that happened in Yountville. Now we got things in our favor. But anyhow, I'd like to even go back at an earlier date.
Please do.
I was 10 years old, and we had an electric train here in Napa Valley. You could go from Calistoga to the ferry building in Vallejo. We ran from Calistoga to Vallejo. You could leave Napa and get to Vallejo in 10 minutes with no stops at Imola or Susco. But if there was no stops, you could get to Vallejo in 10 minutes. You can't get to Vallejo today if all the stoplights are green in 10 minutes.
You are correct about that.
Yeah.
So the electric train came in after the diesel train was here?
Oh,
Or were they ever here at the same time?
Yeah, there was 2 tracks here. There wasn't diesel. There was the electric train and the steam train.
Steam train, thank you.
And there was 2 tracks, 2 sets of tracks. The electric train went from Calistoga to Vallejo. The other train, which was Southern Pacific or something like that, would deliver things all the way up to Calistoga. And they had stockyards along the way where they'd drop off sheep or drop off, different things along the way. That's what the train, the Pacific Blue was one of the trains. One of them was
Right.
a train station, the other was the electric. But anyhow, I came here as a 10-year-old. This is 1933, to the sham battle.
You're going to have to tell me, I haven't heard of the sham battle.
Okay. When all of the World War veterans came home and were members here at the Veterans Home, of course I don't want to call it loot, but I'll call it souvenirs. They brought all the souvenirs from World War I, German souvenirs and stuff. So down where the golf course is, they came from the Presidio in San Francisco, dressed in World War I uniforms, complete uniforms, with rifles and blanks in the gun. And up where the chapel is now would be the Germans with their spike hats in their uniforms, and they would have a war.
Was this an annual event?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. And then after the sham battle, we'd all go to the ball game and the picnics. Well, the ball game is, Cleve Borman hired, we didn't have Major League Baseball out here, but Cleve Borman hired all of these retired, as many as he could get, Pacific Post baseball players, and he would give them a job at the Veterans Home if they'd play baseball for him. And Mike Shannon, out of Imola, Mike Shannon would give all of these Pacific players he could get. He got a giant player by the name of Forsyth, Cy Forsyth, to play for Imola, and they had all of these semi-pro baseball teams come in, and they would play against Imola, and they play against the Veterans. Cy Forsyth would play center field. He was a giant player at one time, New York Giants. He played center field. When someone would hit the ball to Cy Forsyth, he would catch the ball behind his back.
Wow.
And the guy thought he missed it. And he'd tear around first base, he'd tear around second base thinking he had a home run, and Cy Forsyth would hold the ball up. So we had some real ball players. And all of the boys in Yountville used to shag balls for these guys, see. It was a real treat. I didn't get to do it. However, I would come up. Cleve Borman had a brother that lived next door to us, Fred Borman, and his son, and Fred Borman in Napa would bring me up to the ball games with his son. And we'd go to the ball games over there. And then after the ball games, behind the bleachers, the fight was better than the ball game, because they were damn serious about baseball around here. And all of the kids from Yountville would shag balls for these guys. And they became the finest baseball players when they moved to Napa High. They didn't start they started right in the varsity. They were excellent ball players. But anyhow, that was my first trip to the Veterans Home in 1933.
1933. Can you tell us a little bit about what it looked like back then?
Well, they used to have an arch when you came up.
Mm-hmm.
And then right up here where it dead ends, where it comes up the road, there was a huge cannon, and all of the balls, ammo balls, that fit that cannon. The Lincoln Theater, they had a Lincoln Theater, it was a wood frame building. It cost us 25 cents to go to the show. Nancy and I would come to the show. During World War II, they were short of metal. So they took that cannon and melted it down because they needed to make shells for the war. They did the same thing at Fuller Park. It had another big cannon down there. They took that cannon in World War II and melted it down because they were short. But I can remember those things very, very, very. I spent most of my time at Lincoln Theater. As a matter of fact, I helped tear it down. In 1952, I was a carpenter, and I worked on this building here. In 1954, I put up most of the sheetrock and acoustical tile in our crew did. There was 4 of us. And then I went to work over in Eisenhower building and worked on the Eisenhower. But those are the few things I remember that Colonel Holderman's house, because I was there in his house several times. Mm-hmm. Because every time he'd make arrangements to move Blackjack, the horse, on his parades, Nancy's uncle would haul him in the trailer. And then, of course, I was in the house several times. And you know, Colonel Holderman, I couldn't help but overhear a lot of conversations with him. His Master Sergeant, Irv Klein, was over in Santa Rosa. They were in the Lost Battalion. There was only 60 men that survived out of the battalion. And when the Colonel Holderman turned around and a veteran went to him, or someone went to him, he would tell him on the spot, yes or no. I won't turn it over to let me look into it. I'll turn it over to the department heads. This guy had...
He was decisive.
Yeah, and it was wonderful, because what he did, he wanted to change those buildings that were built in 1884. There were fire traps. Now you're talking about buildings that were built in 1884.
So they were still there in the 30s, 1930s.
Well, he started, the WPA, I think, built one building, but he turned around and kept going to Sacramento to get those wood buildings converted to concrete buildings. Now Owen Duffy ran the beef. Boddy ran the breasted, fisted chicken. Mr. Villarga ran the hog ranch. The people from Sacramento would come over and look at the buildings and take the place. They'd go home with a quarter of beef and half a hog.
Some good chickens?
Yeah, they'd go out to the fifth time over. Mr. Donahue, they had a farm. They had all of the canned fruit, all of the different things. So whenever Colonel Holman went to Sacramento, he got what he wanted. They never forgot his kindness, his tour, and his record. It was really something. If you would check on Colonel Holman's record, I did. I knew his wife well, too. But he stood over a machine gunner with 245s, covering him so he could reload. Wounded, 3 Purple Hearts. So, he was for the veterans 100%. And he changed all of those wooden buildings to what we have today. And I can tell you that I was blessed, imagine, to be associated with all those people, to have such a wonderful life. I married a girl, we've been married 62 years. She knew the home better than I did. And I had more fun being raised and knowing these people. And the sad part of it is, when I was a veteran service officer, I was able to read the back of a discharge, is what we call a DD 214. And the sad part of it is, when I was a veteran service officer, I was able to read the back of a discharge, is what we call a DD 214. When these World War I veterans would come in, and I got a chance to get them into the home or whatever they needed, I had the privilege of reading the DD 214, what Argonne Woods, Chateauguay, all of these different battles that they were in France. And when I'd ask them for their serial number, they'd give me their rifle number first. Then they'd give me their serial number. And when I asked for their Social Security number, they had to reach in their wallet to get it. But it was just a thrill. And the unfortunate thing, Margie, you think about this, we never know how much talent is in this veterans home, not only on the staff, but members. There's so much talent in this veterans home of these men that you never find out about it until you read it in the obituary. And it's a shame, because what you should be doing, when you want to talk to an attorney, I got 3 of them in my building. One's an international attorney, one's a labor attorney, another one is a big firm in San Francisco. If you want an engineer, if you want to have an accountant, if you want to have a professor, if you want to have put a little ad in the paper, would like to talk to a veteran that has these qualifications. Because I know that it's in here and you could save a lot of consultant money. And that's important.
A lot of experience.
I mean, big time, big time. I could probably go right around this room and ask those 2 guys, but they don't like to talk about it.
We'll have to get them in your chair, and we can drag it out of them, I think.
Anyhow.
So I have some other questions about the Veterans Home. And as you well know, 1884, the Grand Army of the Republic was able to purchase 910 acres up here. And I understand that some of those 910 acres were actually sold. And you know that story. We would love to hear that.
Well, I went over to Sacramento and asked this particular department if they had any surplus land.
And what year was this?
This was back in 55.
Before Yountville was even incorporated.
Yeah, it was in the 50s, because I was living at it was in the 50s. So I went over to this particular department and said, "Does the state have any surplus land for sale?" And this man says to me, "Yes, we have some land for sale, but it takes 2 people to be interested in it." So I have at that time my wife's sister was living in Sacramento, so I said to my wife's brother-in-law, "Go over to this department and ask them if they have any surplus land for sale." And the fellow says, "There was a fellow in here last week, so now that 2 people are interested in it, we'll put it up for sale." So the 360 acres, Volts and Page bought it. We bid on it,
Where was this 360 acres?
right in back of the home.
So it was part of the 910 acres that
That's
was
right.
from the original,
Land grant, yes.
okay,
Now, what it was used for,
360 acres.
360 acres. They split it. Volts took 180, Page took 180. But what it was used for, the local people in Yountville would go deer hunting up there. They had bridle trails through there. Blackjack, Colonel Holman had his horse Blackjack. Matthews, I think his name was. They had horses in the barn up there, and they used to ride. They would ride over to Mrs. Bianchi's ranch over there next door with the old Hampton place. But anyhow, getting back to the 360 the acres, it was used for the local. Jim Girardi the buck hunters, they used to hunt deer. And they would position different people through the 360. And Jim Girardi would run the dogs. And he would start at just on the other side of the property, which is on the other side of the cemetery.
So it's still east of the reservoir, or is it west of the reservoir that's?
It's south of the reservoir, and it goes from the cemetery west up to the Veterans Peak.
Okay, thanks.
And what they would do, when in the contract, when we bid on it, we missed the bid on it. We bid $13 an acre, and they got it for $15. So what happened was that all of these deer hunters would go up there, but in the contract, it says ingress and egress during the daylight hours. You couldn't go into that property
After dusk.
at the dark. However, that didn't seem to bother Mr. Volz because his daughter was big into choppers. So they figured they didn't have to worry about whether they could go in at nighttime or not. They'd put a pad up there if they wanted to develop it, you know. But they didn't want to develop it. What Lowitz did, he ended up selling his share to Leonard. So Leonard Nancy's uncle ended up owning the 360 acres.
So that would be, what was Leonard's last name?
Page.
Leonard Page. So
H.L.
he
Page.
bought,
And then when he died, he left it to his grandson and his granddaughter, which was Dan Page, Jeff Page, and the sister. Anyhow,
and they sold it too?
They sold it. I don't know who to or how, or even when they sold it, but they sold it. So some private individual.
Is there any roads? Do you have to take the road on the veterans' property to get up there, or is there another?
No, see, they bordered the property. Volts bordered the property, and Page on that side. They were south of the property, so they could have got into the property at nighttime with no question at all. But the only way, there's no roads up there. There's a path. A fellow by the name of Stan Ring put a television. He went down to Leonard and Lily and said, "We'd like to put an antenna for TV reception." So you look up there and you'll see these poles. Stan Ring put all these poles in, and he put a tower up on a TV antenna up there, and he wired the whole home for the local channels, 3, 4, 5, 7, you know, that's all you would get. They would get here at that time. But anyhow, those poles are still standing. And then they went modern with the big dishes, you know, and everything else. But nothing has been done with the property since the 1950s, other than the buck hunt. Maybe these people hunt deer up there, I don't know.
Well, that certainly explains why the 910 original acres is now, it's called a 550-acre campus. So
That's right.
thank you very much for filling in that gap for me.
My pleasure.
So another piece of land that I'd like to ask about, I've heard a little bit about, we have a park in Yountville called Veterans Park. It's right under the overpass, Washington Street in California there. Now, was that ever a part of the Veterans Home, or did the...
Oh, yeah. all
Tell
the way,
us that story if you
well,
could.
all 29, you know,
Right?
Washington Street. That was a main road. The Veterans Home property went right down to that road. So when they put the freeway in 1964, I think it was, when they put that in, that left that void between Washington Street and the freeway, which was Veterans Home property. So the Veterans Home turned around and gave it to the city because, you know, why should we go down underneath the overpass to take care of that land down there? Let's get rid of it. So they ended up, and I think Charlie C. from C's Candy had a little something to do with that. He was one of our clients, and I picked that up off the side. I think he went to the council and they negotiated for the state. Ben Farrell was involved at that time. He was a post fund operator here, and they decided to give that land to the city. So the Veterans Home gave it to the city.
That's great. I never knew that. So that was
State property.
state property, and it was then dedicated
Mhm.
to the veterans,
Yep.
as it remains today.
Yeah. And they ought to give the veterans a break on it.
Well,
The bocce ball things, you know, they shouldn't be so picky down there because if veterans want to play a little bocce, but I'm going to say, forget it. We're going to get our own bocce ball courts here, so you don't have to put, I won't put the heat on you.
well, that's okay. I think that now if more people know that story, maybe they'll also.
Well, it's a wonderful thing to see, you know, if people come for the fireworks and people come for the ball game. It's wonderful that the Veterans Home turned the swimming pool over to the town of Yountville. They pay for it, no question about it. I hope they make some money on it, but at least they're saving some kids and teaching them how to swim.
Well, actually, we don't make any money at all. It costs all
Yeah.
the taxpayers and all of us a little, but I think you're
Yeah.
absolutely right. People do
If
enjoy
you
it.
save one kid from drowning, it's worth it.
Correct.
Yeah. Anyhow, go ahead. What's your next one, pal?
Let's see, let's go back a little bit. I'm very curious about, when you said you went to all the council meetings. I am also a council member, and back then, it was just, the town was being just incorporated, so you probably had a lot of stuff to really work out. Right now, we're busy doing things, but back then, I'm sure they were very busy just setting up the government. Can you tell us a little bit about what some of the major issues were that they were talking about in the local government?
Well, we were they had hired I guess they still do, the building department.
So we have some employees in the building department. We still only have 26 full-time employees in the
So
town.
you hire the sheriff's department, you
Yes.
hire the building department.
Well, we have several full-time staff members in our building department.
Good. Because when we were involved in the Vintage and the Magnolia Hotel, we were red tagged for everything we wanted to do.
Because the county,
The s-
the
the city of Napa.
the city of Napa, that we did used to contract that out.
Yeah. And I don't know why they were so scared of what we were going to do, but we called it a cultural center, and right away they thought Sausalito and hippies and, you know, goddamn all kind of stuff, you know. But and no matter what we did, we got red tagged. I got red tagged for the deck on the back of the cafe. I had the sheetrock the stable. We sandblasted the whole building, brought it back to its natural state. When we was in the Magnolia Hotel, we got Mr. Vina put in a set of stairs so we could get into the cellar. It was a 1/4 inch off from the 7 treads to the risers. They made us tear out the stairs. They wouldn't let us use the cellar dining room because there was a 42-foot beam that went right down through the Magnolia Hotel, but when you got into the cellar, there was only a clearance of 6 foot. This beam was there. I refused to cut that beam before the Superior Court. So Charlie Williams, my attorney, says, Ray, let's lower the floor.
Charlie was a smart man.
I would have owned the building 100 years, Marjorie, and never thought of that. He lowered the floor So there was clearance. They needed 6'10", and we lowered the floor so that they could get underneath that beam to get into the cellar dining room. No matter what we did in the Vintage and in the Magnolia Hotel or anything, and a lot of other people who were trying to do business in town had nothing but trouble with the building department. I'll tell you how bad it got. When we bought the property from the Landys, John Landy's wife had a brother that was in the assessor's office. So they wanted to check to see if we were assessed the proper amount.
They wanted their taxes.
Yeah. So they sent, George Abatey didn't come up, but he sent one of his top quality appraisers. He measured the land, went through the Magnolia Hotel, sat in the dining room with us. It was nothing, it was gutted. The building was gutted, and we had a table there, and I called it a dining room, but anyhow, we're sitting there, and this guy says to me, I went all through the property, I went all through the building. I have to ask you how much you paid for it. I said, $50,000. He looked at my wife right in the eye, and he says to my wife, Nancy, your husband got screwed. But we ended up outsmarting him because we hung in there, and every time I needed help, I called Charlie Williams. So they wouldn't let us use the dining room because of that timber. Now we hired the crew, got the chef, got the food, got everything going to open up all the reservations and everything, and we can't use the cellar dining room. So I have to go before the Superior Court. Blankenberg was the judge's name. Charlie Williams went with me. We're walking up the courthouse into the stair, and we go up halfway, and there's a landing. Charlie grabbed my arm, and he says, now, Ray, when we get in here before the judge, I don't want you to open your goddamn mouth. Thank you, Charlie. So I didn't. So Charlie Williams jumped before the judge, and he says, Your Honor, he's hired the baiters, he's hired the busboys, he's hired the chef, he's hired the food, he's got the reservations. Is it possible that he can have two settings in the upstairs dining room? And the judge agreed to it. So we were able to function. And in the meantime, we lowered the floor, and then we could go back into the cellar. 22 in the cellar, 28 upstairs, 48 people, one entree a night, 48 times. But they red tagged us for everything in the Vintage that they could possibly red tag us for. I don't know why they were so scared of us.
So was the Grosinger's house, which used to be compadres next door, what was that being used for at the time?
It was a house we hired a manager. I had Don Smith was his name, hired him. That building was originally 3 stories. Chris Marquez tore the 2 top stories off. The top floor was water tanks from the canyon up Hopper's Canyon? No, it's not Hopper's Creek. Well, anyhow, the water supply came from across the freeway, or across and it went into the 3rd floor, and the tanks, the water was up on the top floor. It was gravity flow to feed the winery. Well, Chris Marquez come in and took off the 2 top floors, and they made a home out of it. And the manager and his family moved in there. That's what we used to manage. And then when they were gone, I don't know when the new owners put in compadre, or I don't know how that worked. But it was a beautiful mansion in its day. There's probably pictures of it someplace.
I have seen some photos. It was quite impressive.
Yeah.
So there was some really beautiful buildings back a long time ago, but I think many people think Yountville is very beautiful today. So just give me some of your thoughts and impressions back then when you were very active in both the Vintage 1870, and which is now we call the Marketplace for people who may not even remember that name, and the Magnolia Hotel. Did you ever envision Yountville would be like it is today?
Well, yes, I did. I watched Thurman Gates, and I could see what he was doing, because he was pumping a lot of money into that RV park.
Mm-hmm.
And he was getting rid of the garages, and he was getting rid of the different things. So I had in my mind, because I was forced out of the cattle business, that when I moved over there and saw that property, actually, well, his vineyard on it, it had vines from Weber Street down to the house. They had grapevines, and the cities insisted that we keep the vineyards all the way down to California Drive. So I figured, well, if the vineyards are forcing me out, I'll go over there and maybe I can make a deal on this property, which we did. And I had visions of watching Thurman Gates clear it up down there, and I knew him well, Ella too. So when we were forced to make a move. And instead of fighting the vineyards, we ended up joining them. Now I got vineyard land. And it turned out perfect because I could see with the freeway going through, it gives these wineries ingress and egress. That's why Domaine Chandon come in. They didn't have to worry about the traffic. When that take line going down there, when they cut a hole in the fence so he could get into the old Grossinger, see, that was all Grossinger Vineyard.
Right.
It was connected before the freeway went in. It went all the way down to Washington Street. That was the Grossinger Vineyard, plus the winery, plus the stable, all those buildings. But when they
So Domaine Chandon was part of Yountville, I guess
yeah,
you could
it's
say.
perfect, see, by coming in, when they moved in, and we laughed at them because they were going to charge for tasting. See, when you used to go wine tasting, I'll give you an example. You went to Louis Martini's winery. He started you out with the white wine, and you went to the red wine, and then you went to Moscato di Canelli, which is a sweet wine with Muscat grapes picked at 9 sugar. It's an after dinner. So when you had that, you were finished tasting.
Right.
But in those days, you didn't have to go on a tour. You could go from one winery to the next winery. In the course of a day, you could probably take in 4 wineries. And by that time, you'd be pretty stupid. Yeah, you would be.
I'm sure you would.
Yeah, you're getting all that. And they didn't give you a thimble full of wine. They gave you a glass
You
of
want
wine.
to make sure you knew what it tasted like.
Yeah. And so anyhow, when the Domaine Chandon come in and said they're going to charge for the wine taste, we thought they were out of their mind. But they knew what they were doing because they charged, and you had to go on a tour. So what does that do? That means you can only go on 2 tours a day. By the time you go through the tour, go into the tasting room, it's noon.
Right.
If you get here in the morning, they open at 10. Then you go to another one in the afternoon, so you got 2 wineries to go to, so everybody's happy. But you pay for it. We put on a wine festival. They had a wine festival in Napa. They had 900 people at the fairgrounds. And I read about this upstate New York, that had a wine festival, and they did it for 3 days. Sometimes it lasted a week. So we decided to put on a wine festival in Yountville. I bought 10,000 glasses with vintage 1870 on it.
And what year was this?
Back in the 60s.
Okay.
They advertised it throughout the Bay Area. When you walked onto the property, I had guys all around with all these glasses, and I says, this is a wine festival, you're going to need a glass, but it's going to cost you $1. And the wineries might charge you 25 cents a glass. I don't know that, but they might. Well, we sold 10,000 glasses. Brother Tim from Christian Brothers sent down 4,000 glasses with Christian Brothers written on it. Bob and Davy sent down 2,000 glasses. Between 25 and 2,000, I kind of forget now. We ended up with paper cups. We sold all of those glasses. We had 18,000 people.
Wow.
And 33 glasses, 33,000 glasses of wine. The sheriff's prodigy was there with their horses. The people came from all over. It exposed Yountville and the vintage, and they saw the shops. I put my daughter on the door, the front door of the vintage over there with a cattle counter, because I had a cattle counter, see. And I paid my daughter so much an hour to sit there and count everybody, not counting all the other doors around the vineyard. This is when we first started. We went from 200 people to 4,000. So, it was just one of those things that happened.
Wow.
I can't tell you, it wasn't anything that I did, it was just because it was there. The Marquis de Pins called me up after we bought the property, and she says, Mr. Monte, she's from BV up there. She called me up, we had a nice conversation. She said, I've been riding past that building for so many years, I'm just delighted somebody's going to do something with it. We had the nicest visit. And we had the award for remodeling a building. And then Bob Mondavy got the reward for having the newest winery. And then the party in St. Helena got another award for remodeling the railroad station.
Mm-hmm.
And Bob Mondavy says, there's only one thing wrong with this, Ray. And I says, what's that? He says, you're first. And he was right. Because now people come, froze to their steering wheel, driving 65 miles an hour. They peel off into Yountville and they relax. They can stay in the motel. They can walk to the dining room. They can drink all they want because they don't have to drive the car. The wives can shop. They can play golf now. It's a wonderful village. I've seen people come from Connecticut when it's miserable. New England states, our guests. When Washington is soaking wet with rain, when it's so hot, and I've had people come from Arizona that'll stand out in the rain when it's raining because they never see it. And I knew where they were coming from all over the world because it wasn't anything I did. It was every bottle that left this valley was advertising. It would say Rutherford, it would say Yountville, it would say Oakville. They'd get the map out. I'd like the wine. Let's go over there. See? It was a wonderful thing. You're talking about millions of bottles going out in advertising our valley.
And every day, I appreciate living here myself, and just about everyone I know, people think we take it for granted, and we certainly don't at all. So tell me a little bit about what you do these days at the Veterans Home. I can tell you're probably not just sitting back and not doing anything.
Well, I'm very lucky my health is right. In 1990, I got cancer, the bladder. And Blue Cross dropped me. They said, we'll cover you for everything except your cancer. They can't do that after July of 1994. But here I am in 1990 with no help. Because I was the Veteran Service Officer of the county and knew the Veterans Home for 11 years, I didn't have any insurance. So I checked into the Veterans Home in 1990.
You've been here since 1990.
Now, I didn't have any insurance. I was operated on 4 times. And Dr. Hildreth would get into my bladder, and he would get the cancer before it got in the muscle. And he would check me every 3 months. And then 1991, I had get it again. 1992, get it again. 1994, get it again. And then he would check me every 3 months. So I went 10 years with that. And lo and behold, the doctor that performed the surgery on me is on the staff here, Dr. Hildreth. But he turned me loose about 2 years ago. But I was able to function, and he saved my life. He caught me instead of a bag on my side.
Right.
I was very lucky. So anyhow, that made I'm in pretty good shape. So Nancy and I would get up at 5:30 in the morning and go out to the driving range. The driving range was rocks and it was rough. You couldn't use an automatic picker to pick up the golf balls. You had to go out there with shag bags and pick up the golf balls. Now, a lot of them would hit a rock and it'd be scored. There was 4 of us that did that, 5:30 till 10. Picking up shag bags. Picking up
Wow.
and then we would wash them and clean them and open the driving range at 10 o'clock, and that was our day. We did that for 7 years. Well, John Wood started that driving range with a coffee can and a wire and a wheelbarrow. And then someone donated the buckets, someone donated the stands to put the clubs on. The man from the Silverado Country Club, the greenskeeper, came out and showed us how to grow the grass. Move 10 times. By the time you get to the 10th one, number 1 will have grass again. These golfers can hit off the grass. They want to hit off the grass. So that little operation went from next to nothing to netting $50,000 a year. Now that's easy to do. Therapeutic pay was $3 an hour.
So you've been pretty busy once you even got up here getting things going.
And then what happened? You didn't have to pay any electricity, you didn't have to pay anything, no insurance, no rental. It's easy to make net money selling bucket of balls at $4. So anyhow, that was our start of our work. And then we would take off 2 months to go crabbing, Dungeness crabbing, 6 miles out of Coos Bay, a town called Charleston. And we go for 2 months after Dungeness crab. So then we went, when they closed the driving range, my wife became a bartender in the tavern, I became her swamper, and then we would work 10 months, and then that money would give us 2 months off to go crabbing. And we would come home with about anywhere from 150 Dungeness crab to 200. And then I would bring them down here, take them over to the tavern. One fellow would go to the section, get a sheet, put the sheet down on the barbecue table. I'd dump 60 crab on the table and have a crab feed. And we do that every year. Isn't that wonderful?
That is wonderful.
So old and doing that kind of stuff.
I love crab feeds. That just sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, we would go out on the pier. We went to Washington, and they only allow you 4 a day. But we go down to Oregon, and they allow 12 a day. So Nancy and I get 3 rings apiece, and we crab off the pier. And that's how we get our crabs. And of course, every time someone pulls a net up, you have to go over and see what they get. So you get to meet them. They're from Minnesota, they're from South Dakota, they're from Phoenix, Arizona, they're from Fresno, California. We've been doing this for 8 years with these people.
Well, it sounds like you've had a wonderful life as well, and you're just...
Been blessed, Margaret. I've been blessed. I have a wonderful wife, wonderful children, wonderful grandchildren, and wonderful friends. I think Will Rogers said, I never met a man I didn't like, or never a person I didn't like. I think is what he said. And I did what he did. I don't believe in the stock market. I believe in land because they're not making any more of it. And that's what we did. We invested in land. We invested in this. Timing might have been the answer. It wasn't that we were the smartest 2 couple.
Well, luck always helps, doesn't it?
It sure does.
Just learning about the history, I love Yountville, and learning about the history is something that I just find fascinating. I think it's just so important to be able to talk to people like yourself so that current people who live here, the current guests who come here, and the future people who will live here someday.
The agriculture preserve is what saved the valley.
I did want to ask you about that. We might have a few more minutes here. The Ag Preserve was a really important thing that happened to this valley, but it must have been extremely controversial at the time. People, or their land, they couldn't, they had to put it in an agricultural preserve. They couldn't sell it and develop houses. They were seeing what was happening down in Santa Clara Valley. So give us your thoughts about that.
Well, I watched the fight, and it was a tough one. I'll give you an example. Ben Skillings owned the land down there. It's called Trefethlin, that winery down there.
Yes.
And he owned land across the road in Snaffle Canyon. This man came to Ben Skillings and said, I would like to buy the property only if the preserve goes through. And Ben Skillings was fighting agriculture preserve tooth and nail because he didn't want it to go through. And it was a very tough fight all the way through. But as soon as this man said to Ben Skillings, I'll buy it if the preserve goes through, they lost, they lost Ben, those that were fighting it. So they kind of caved away after that. They realized that these people are coming in, and the wineries are able to protect their label. And that's what they did with the preserve. And instead of being techie-tack houses, like the peninsula, the land split now, if you own 80 acres, you can split it once with the residents, and that's it. There's 160 acres. 80 acres. But I don't know what it is in the foothills, but that saved the valley. I think Don Giovanni down there is borders the city limits. It's about
Right,
the end of it,
that's correct.
all the way through. And of course, the wineries are happy because now they have deeded ground, which they can put on that label, a state bottle. This wine is deeded ground. It's an estate bottle of wine. Anything else, it isn't deeded. They can't put that on the label. But that's makes the wineries protected.
The Ag Preserve is,
Yeah, it was.
without some of these things that happen along the way,
That was
we wouldn't have what we have
Yeah.
today and what we'll have
That
for
was one of the
tomorrow.
toughest
You knew the
fights.
Schmitz, and they had a restaurant in the 1870s.
Yeah, Ken Wilkins bought the property from us. Ken Wilkins was a artist, top quality artist. He was in the gallery. He had the next door. He had the art gallery there. But he and his brother invented instantaneous lab technique. You can put a drop of gasoline here and it'll say so much lead, so much ethyl, so much, a drop of blood here, so many red corpuscles, so many white corpuscles. So he sold it to Varian Electronics. And when he sold it to Varian Electronics, he became a millionaire, multi-millionaire. Nicest man, and his wife Wanda, they ended up buying the vintage. And then I hired Don Smith and Sally. And when he bought the vintage, Don Smith went with him because he had 3% of the vintage. So anyhow, they put in the chutney kitchen. They had the chutney kitchen in the vintage. Well, when we sold the vintage, I took the money and went across the street and got the old Wells Fargo building, which is Bouchon's. I went in with the sheriff, Bob Benning, the assessor, and the head of the FBI. The four of us went across the street and bought Bouchon's and the Rex Hotel. It was an old
Which is the Rex Hotel, is now Bouchon Bakery.
No, Bouchon Bakery was the Wells Fargo building. The Rex Hotel is the pastry shop.
Right, the Bouchon Bakery, right.
Oh, it was just still
Yeah.
Bouchon, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
I didn't realize that.
Now, I want to get back to that in a minute, but I've heard, and maybe you have more information, that when Grosinger built the vintage, it was his winery at the time, he had an extra pile of bricks outside, and Gibbs, whose name is on the top of the building that's Bouchon's now, came over and bought the rest of those bricks and built that brick building that's now Bouchon's. Have you ever heard that story?
No, never heard that story.
Okay.
It was, when we got the building, we were cleaning it out and we found a rubber stamp that said Wells Fargo. You know how they used to have those
Yes.
rubber stamps on there? We found that rubber stamp when we were cleaning the building up, so we knew it was the Wells Fargo building.
Right,
I don't know who built it, but
okay.
anyhow, Wells Fargo, it was a Wells Fargo building. I called the banker and the dentist here, his cousin was the head of the Wells Fargo Bank,
Okay.
Dr. G. And I said, gee, we need a bank in Yountville. He says, call my cousin up, and he's the head of the Wells Fargo. So I called him up in Pasadena and says, would you like to come up and look at a building and put a Wells Fargo bank in this Wells Fargo building? Because up in there it's had these glasses are like wagon wheels. It's a beautiful building.
It is a beautiful building.
So then he says to me, well, when he finished this building in Pasadena, I'll come up and take a look. But in the meantime, Napa Valley came in. So
Right.
now we had a bank. And then,
Which is now West America Bank.
yeah, it used to be Napa Valley Bank. But then when I had the four of us were involved in that property, they put a sale price on it. They said, okay, let's sell it. Because I wanted to take the money and finish the
So
money.
Wells Fargo never came in there?
No, they didn't come in.
Okay.
Because the other people beat them. So when the partners, they decided to sell, they had an offer. And because there would have been a standoff, 2 and 2, I said, I'll tell you what, Nancy and I won't vote on this deal. You guys decide whether you want to accept it or not. Well, they didn't accept it. They wouldn't, the guy wanted to buy it, and they said, no, we want so much more for it. So they came to me and said, would you have accepted his offer? I said, sure. If you sell at a profit all the time, you never go broke. You know.
That's true.
So what they said, okay, we'll buy you out, we'll pay you off for what your interest in that quarter was. Well, perfect, because we took that money and bought the Magnolia Hotel with the sale of the ranch and was able to finish it. Now, all of our used furniture, when we got married, ended up being antiques that belonged into the Magnolia. And it couldn't have worked out nice, because now I don't have any partners. I've got my wife to help make decisions, and she's very talented, and a first-class lady, and has a rapport for decorating the Magnolia, the old badge, the antiques. So we don't have a partner. It worked out perfect. In the meantime, Don Smith went up and bought the French Laundry, and I think he got the house in back of it, but because the new owners didn't want Smith, or however you pronounce it. I should get Smith in here, but they moved to.
Because it really was a laundry.
Oh yes.
When they purchased it.
Yeah, John Landy and Guillaume, they're very French. Guillaume owned the hotel, the Landys and Al Lacoste, very French, had the French Laundry. They owned the Rock Villa, the wine that I told you that got wiped out.
Right.
They had 9. When John Landy had a brother by the name of Pete, and they were the heirs to those people. So when they died, John and Pete, they divided 18 properties in Yountville. John took 9. John took the Magnolia Hotel. He went in, he had a partner, he had Shiflett, he had Father Carmody, his brother Pete, and himself. 4 of them owned the Magnolia Hotel. And John Landy bought out the priest from Santa Rosa, the Monsignor. He bought out the Shiflett, the judge that was involved. So he ended up owning the Magnolia. But they had a lot of property in town. Very successful, very successful people. Anyhow, any more questions? One more.
No, I just can't thank you enough. I'm sure we're probably going to want to come back and talk to you about more stuff once I digest everything you've told me, but thank you very, very much.
It's a pleasure meeting you.
Great thanks to Mr. Moore for introducing us.
Well, I want to tell you that it's a pleasure meeting you, dear. And someday I'll meet your husband down at the council meeting. I'm sure something's going to go wrong. I'll probably be down there.
All right, well, come on down. We meet every, the first and third Tuesday of every month.
Oh,
so.
I'm kidding.
We're redoing our town hall right now, doing a seismic retrofit, so we're meeting the old community center at our meeting next Tuesday. So.
Good for you. Well, I think I'm real happy. It just tickles Nancy and I to see everything that's happening.
Great.
We're just
Great.
thrilled to death. I can't tell you enough. When we go downtown and I see all those young dollies down there spending that money with the plastic and the room tax. See, they wanted to put a room tax on the Magnolia Hotel. I said, fine. Put a room.
The city wanted to do that at the time.
Yeah, they had it clean. I said, fine. You put a room tax on them. Now we're the first.
Because that was our first TOT, as we call it, transient occupancy tax. Was on the Magnolia Hotel.
We were the only bed and breakfast in the state, in the county of Napa. The only one. I said, fine, put a room tax on us, but get somebody from the Chamber of Commerce and get somebody from the council and get me on the committee, because I know where the people are coming from and I know where you should advertise. They would come with the seasons. They would come.
Yes.
Well, they didn't develop it. We never had a room tax. But when I look at the Bardazona property, 67 rooms at $600 a night. When Mercedes-Benz rented the 67 rooms for 3 days, and the Lexus people rented the 67 rooms for 3 days, that's $600 a night. You're making a lot of money, honey.
Well,
10%.
Well, it's even the tax is even a few percent higher now than that.
12, good for you.
Yeah.
Because they're
And
coming
there's-
in with the plastic.
But that's what keeps the town running now. That's why the streets look good, the parks look good. We have been able to build the
Yeah.
community center and provide that to
What is it,
people.
60% of your income from your room tax?
It's higher than that. It's closer to 70. I mean, actually, with all the buildings we have now, the sales tax is going up, so as a proportion,
Isn't that wonderful?
it really, when people, say that sometimes they're tired of looking at all the guests walking up and down the street, the guests pay our bills, so.
That's right. Oh, yeah.
We're very appreciative of the businesses and the restaurants and the hotels that bring the people in that
Good for you, Greg.
allow us to have such a wonderful time.
Oh, yeah, because see, when they, after you sell the product, you still have it. These people still sell the room, they still have it.
Mm-hmm.
And these folks are coming in, and it's wonderful, because they turn around and they leave.
And the veterans get to come down and enjoy it.
Oh,
The
yeah.
people that live there.
Yeah.
So I think it works out for everybody.
Oh, it's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. I'm just tickled to death. I thought it was be 60%. I'm happy to hear it's 70.
Yes.
Nancy and I, we go to all the restaurants. We don't go to the French Laundry. Being an old restaurant man, I cannot see myself paying $200 or $300 for it.
Well, Thomas Keller once a year has locals
We
nights.
made that trip.
Good. I'm glad you did. I'm glad